When summer finally arrives in Russia, people from all over the world descend on the Moscow Air Show. Here, the latest helicopters, civil airliners and military aircraft all perform in an annual celebration of Russian aviation. Everyone has come to see the highlight of the show, Yevgeny Frolov, a Russian aerobatic pilot with years of experience. As test pilot for Sukhoi Design Bureau, he flies the Su-37, which differs greatly from American high-tech fighters. This unique Russian solution relies on vectored thrust and awesome power to fulfill its mission. All of Frolov's skills will be tested because he flies a plane like no other in the world. Together with the crowd, Sukhoi officials look on as the big Su-37 takes to the skies, and the magic begins to unfold. As Yevgeny leaves the ground and takes to the air, he gears up for an awe-inspiring performance. In a series of breathtaking moves, Frolov demonstrates the wide performance envelope of his incredibly nimble aircraft. While the West relies on stealth, the Russian philosophy stresses supermaneuverability and power in old-fashioned dogfighting. In the skies above the Zhukovsky Flight Test Center, Yevgeny Frolov and the Su-37 carry on in the strong tradition of Russian fighters. The origin of fighter aircraft can be traced to Nikolai Zhukovsky, the father of Russian aeronautics. He constructed the country's first wind tunnel in 1902 and conducted aerodynamic tests in his laboratory. Many of the students he mentored would become leading aircraft designers. Despite Zhukovsky's pioneering work, by the time World War I broke out, Russia had no fighters of its own. The Tsar's Air Force had to rely on captured German airplanes, as well as French and British fighters. The Bolshevik rise to power ended Russia's part in the war, but innovation continued in the nation's well-equipped laboratories. Wind tunnel tests allowed designers to develop stronger and faster airframes. Soviet aviation was still in its infancy, but it was beginning to develop its own identity. The early Red Air Force flew fighter planes manufactured in Europe. Engines and aircraft were shipped to Russia in kit form and assembled at the airfields. During the early 1920s, civil war raged in Russia. Fighters used by the communists included the British Avro 504. In 1924, Soviet dictator Joseph Stalin came to power. He recognized the importance of air power and gave needed support to the fledgling Red Air Force. He dubbed his pilots Stalin's Falcons and challenged them to fly higher, faster, and further than anyone. Under the leadership of innovative Marshal Tukhachevsky, the Soviet Army and Air Forces developed their skills by conducting combined operations. They grew from an agrarian peasant army to a modern air power that could compete with the West. The first test of the new Soviet force would take place in Spain. In 1936, civil war broke out between loyalist forces, aided by German dictator Adolf Hitler, and the Republicans, secretly supported by Joseph Stalin. The aircraft sent to Spain were designed by Nikolai Polikarpov. These included the I-15 biplane and the stubby I-16 monoplane. Nicknamed the Rada, the I-16s flew against Hitler's famed Condor Legion pilots. In sometimes desperate fighting, Red aviators managed to give a good account of themselves in the nimble Russian I-16s. The forces used in Spain may have seemed adequate, but during the interim, Adolf Hitler organized a massive buildup of Germany's armed forces. Despite assurances of goodwill, German forces attacked the Soviet Union in June 1941. The war in Spain was one thing, but Operation Barbarossa was another. Using proven blitzkrieg tactics, Hitler's lightning tank and infantry assaults cut through the unprepared Soviet forces. The Luftwaffe attacked in force after finishing the most massive of its redeployments. Modern German aircraft like the Heinkel 111 and the latest Messerschmitt Bf-109s roamed at will. Much of the Red Air Force was destroyed on the ground. The stunned Russians defended the motherland with outmoded I-15 biplanes. These aircraft managed to hold their own in Spain, but now they were shot from the skies by the newer, faster, more lethal German fighters. Stalin's paranoid purges of the 1930s deprived the Air Force of its best and brightest. The remaining officers were more terrified of the firing squad than Luftwaffe aircraft. What remained was poor organization and management. Modern equipment like the I-16 monoplane was no match for the Messerschmitt Bf-109Fs. The resulting onslaught was a bitter lesson for the Red Air Force. An ironic result of Stalin's purges was the emergence of a new generation of Soviet aircraft designers. These gifted men included Alexander Yakovlev, Pavel Sukhoi, and Mikhail Gurevich, who would build some of the world's most famous fighters with Artyom Mikoyan. Semyon Lavochkin developed outstanding radial engine aircraft. In late 1941, the first of a new generation of fighters appeared. They were modern, low-wing monoplanes with enclosed cockpits and retractable landing gear. The aircraft were an improvement, but still, they left much to be desired. The new planes could not match the performance of German fighters opposing them. As the fighting raged, Soviet forces captured an increasing amount of German equipment. When examples of the high-performance Focke-Wulf 190 fighter fell into Russian hands, its advanced radial engine technology was studied under the guidance of Semyon Lavochkin. The lessons learned were incorporated into the Lavochkin LA-5, which developed into one of the best Soviet fighters of the war. Not only did the Red Air Force have new aircraft, the service was drastically reorganized. Fighters, bombers, and ground attack planes comprised mobile air armies that operated together with Red Army forces. The Soviet plan was adopted just in time. Hitler's Army Group B was throwing its weight to an offensive aimed at the industrial city on the Volga River, named Stalingrad. Inside the city, General A.A. Novikov put his reorganized air force to work against the Germans, who employed all available aircraft for the assault. Novikov stressed hit-and-run ambush tactics against the Luftwaffe, who flew thousands of sorties. Ironically, the attacks by Hitler's Air Force served as on-the-job training for Soviet pilots. As more fighters were delivered to the front, the more adept Red aviators became at countering German tactics. Novikov's strategy was beginning to work. More and more transport aircraft were needed to resupply Nazi forces trapped inside Stalingrad. As the Soviet air defense ring tightened, Ju-52s were forced to run the gauntlet. The Russians presumed from the start that the Germans would have to airlift supplies to their troops. The Red Air Force drew a series of concentric rings around the German forces on the map. These designated areas became aerial blockades of fighter planes and curtains of anti-aircraft fire. If the Luftwaffe had had enough transports, they might have been able to supply the beleaguered 6th Army force entombed inside the destroyed city. But the Germans didn't have all the planes they needed. They assembled a ragtag collection of aircraft that were forced to operate under increasingly bad weather conditions. Meanwhile, the Red Air Force grew increasingly aggressive, harassing the long lines of transports despite their fighter protection. Soviet fighters attacked German airfields, which became strewn with destroyed aircraft. On the Eastern Front, the Luftwaffe suffered, but in the West, it got a boost. The Messerschmitt Me-262, the greatest fighter of the war. Its jet power represented the future of high-performance aircraft. During the final months of the war, advancing Soviet troops captured German jet technology, developed at enormous cost and resources. The wartime fighters built by Artyom Mikoyan and Mikhail Gurovich had not been preeminent. Still, their MiG design bureau assumed the challenge of bringing the jet age to Russia. They knew from tests that conventional wing designs would not be suitable for jet power. The MiG team set up a low-speed swept-wing design study and built a strange airplane called the Utka, or Duck, which served as a flying test bed. With a few modifications, the Utka became a valuable research tool. It was from these humble beginnings that MiG would become the most famous aircraft manufacturing organization in the world, known to even more people than Boeing. In 1945, Stalin ordered a crash program to build fighters using captured German turbojets, as there were no suitable Soviet jet engines. When the MiG I-300 fighter prototype flew for the first time in 1946, it was powered by a German BMW engine. The production version was called the MiG-9. 550 were built between 1946 and 1948. They were powerfully armed with one 37mm cannon and two 23mm cannon. Already the Cold War was beginning. Known by the NATO codename Fargo, the MiG-9 was the first Soviet fighter equipped with an ejection seat. The MiG-9 was a great achievement for Artyom Mikoyan. He was awarded the Stalin Prize, but the stress of the project led to a heart attack. Mikoyan had competitors, and one of them was Alexander Yakovlev, the famous wartime fighter designer. Yakovlev decided that his new aircraft would use components of the Yak-9 piston engine fighter to the greatest possible extent. The engine was mounted underneath the fuselage, and the tail was strengthened to protect it from hot exhaust gases. The tail wheel was eliminated as unsuitable. When the Yak-17 appeared, it featured a tricycle landing gear with the nose wheel housed in a bulge underneath the forward fuselage. Stalin was pleased with the Yak jet fighters, and this established Alexander Yakovlev as one of the leading post-war designers. Along with Mikoyan and Gurovich, he was now at the top of the Soviet design pecking order. The competition to be the best was fierce. In 1946, Artyom Mikoyan got a big break in the Cold War race to develop the greatest jet fighter. Along with engine designer Vladimir Klimov, he visited Rolls-Royce in England. There he learned that the acquisition of a small number of Nien and Derwent jet engines by the Soviet Union was likely. Mikoyan and Klimov quickly returned home and reconfigured their airframe and power plant proposals to meet the Nien specifications, which were the state of the art at the time. When the engines were shipped to Russia, they were copied, and soon Nien 2s and Derwent 5s were rolling down the assembly lines. Now they were known as Soviet RD-45s and RD-500s. No license was ever negotiated with Rolls-Royce to produce the engines, so the company declined to supply technical support. By 1947, Yakovlev Design Bureau installed a Derwent 5 engine in their new Yak-23 Interceptor, which enjoyed a successful test program. Production was canceled, however, by the advent of MiG's I-310, the prototype of what was to become the legendary MiG-15. The new aircraft differed greatly from the MiG-9. It featured a tubular fuselage with the engine mounted inside. The jet engine exhaust nozzle was at the rear of the tube, so those gases did not come into contact with the fuselage. The heavy-duty landing gear folded into the wing, and the aircraft's skin was constructed of aluminum. On December 30th, 1948, Viktor N. Yuganov flew the first production MiG-15 aircraft. It had outstanding performance. Production began in several satellite countries. The new fighters were delivered to Soviet Air Defense Forces in January 1949. Like most Soviet fighters, toughness was the major characteristic of the MiG-15. It could withstand rough treatment without breaking. Back at Sagi, the Soviet Union's leading aeronautical research center, aircraft development continued during the heady atmosphere of the 1950s. Researchers looked for ways to improve the MiG-15. They conducted wind tunnel tests to investigate swept angle designs and the use of wing fences to improve boundary layer performance. The result was a new aircraft for the Red Air Force, delivered in October 1952. The MiG-17, like the MiG-15, appeared in many different versions. The radar-equipped MiG-17PF became the standard interceptor of the Soviet Air Force. The MiG-17PFU became the first operational aircraft equipped with air-to-air beam-riding missiles. A radar aiming sight was installed on the top of the engine inlet. The race for a supersonic fighter led Mikoyan designers to increase the MiG-17's wing angle to a 55-degree sweep. This allowed for a faster, more powerful aircraft known as the MiG-19. The new aircraft was outfitted with the RD-9B engine, which had 25% more thrust than its predecessor. In early 1954, the MiG-19 reached Mach 1.33, unofficially breaking the world speed record. But it was not claimed in the interest of secrecy. At the time, the Soviet Union stretched from Europe to the Pacific Ocean. There were not enough airfields to protect the vast country. A rocket-assisted version of the MiG-19, the SM-30, was developed as a quick reaction fighter. The Russian solution was a truck-launched aircraft that could be recovered anywhere. The MiG-19 was rugged enough to land in fields after completing its mission. Follow-on aircraft needed to be faster and more powerful than the MiG-19. At Sagi, researchers studied the Delta-type wing, noting that it produced much less drag than swept or straight wings. They also found that the thinner a wing is relative to its width, the less drag it produces. Wind tunnel tests revealed that the new fighter would need the Delta wing design as well as new engine technology. Experiments with the MiG-15 and 17 had demonstrated the benefit of an engine installed inside the fuselage with a nose intake. These were subsonic aircraft, however, and as speeds increased through the transonic zone, it became necessary to slow down incoming air with a cone-shaped inlet spike. The result of this research was the MiG-21, another major achievement for Mikoyan and Gurevich. The performance of the aircraft was so outstanding that for the first time, the Soviets decided to claim official world speed records. The value of propaganda overwhelmed that of official secrecy. The result was another victory for Artyom Mikoyan. On October the 1st, 1959, MiG Bureau test pilot Georgy Masalov set the Soviet official world speed record on a closed 25-kilometer course. He was clocked at 2,388 kilometers per hour, almost 1,500 miles per hour. The Cold War climate during this era stressed parity with the West. The development of supersonic fighter aircraft and the introduction into service of the Mach 2 capable MiG-21 allowed the Soviet air forces to grow and improve. Mikoyan had his success. Now his rival, Alexander Yakovlev, was trying not to be left behind, not just compete against the West. His first twin-jet interceptor was called the Yak-25, NATO codenamed Flashlight. It was selected for Red Air Force use in May 1953. Yakovlev's next effort was a greatly improved interceptor similar to the Yak-25, but much more powerful. It had two of the Tumansky R-11 turbojets developed for the MiG-21. The bicycle landing gear allowed space for large weapon stores under the wings and fuselage. Serious production of the Yak-28 began in the early 1960s. It surpassed many established aircraft in speed, range, and altitude capability. Continuing development and modification of the Yak-28 proved it to be a versatile aircraft, capable of adjusting to many roles during the dynamics of the Cold War. In 1964, a growing escalation of American involvement in Indochina led to an inevitable collision with Communist North Vietnamese forces. During that year, it was reported that North Vietnamese torpedo boats attacked a U.S. Navy destroyer. The response was a series of bombing raids over the port of Haiphong and a massive air operation known as Rolling Thunder. On the ground, North Vietnamese ground controllers tracked American aircraft and vectored North Vietnamese MiG-17s towards them using a classic Soviet tactic called ground control intercept. These attacks carried out over North Vietnam against U.S. aircraft like the F-105 were moderately effective. The MiG-17s were considerably more maneuverable than the American fighter bombers like the F-105 Thunder Chief, the primary bombing aircraft of Rolling Thunder. The North Vietnamese used ambush tactics to engage the American pilots suddenly at close range with 37mm cannon fire. The Thunder Chief was a well-regarded aircraft, but the MiG-17 was a pure dogfighter in the hands of a capable pilot. New tactics and increasingly large assaults by North Vietnamese pilots took a serious toll on American fighter bombers. U.S. fighter escorts responded with Sidewinder missiles that downed a large number of MiGs during Rolling Thunder. But it didn't help the Americans that in 1966, the Soviet Union and China were aiding the fledgling North Vietnamese Air Force. Now it had the faster, more deadly MiG-21 interceptors. The tilting balance of air power angered the Americans, who decided to carry out a massive raid on the Phuc Yen airfield near Hanoi. Still, North Vietnamese Air Force pilots flew against the Americans. They shot down 81 U.S. aircraft and held their own in desperate air-to-air engagements. Those that survived honed their skills and learned to rely on experience rather than ground controllers. Meanwhile, during the height of the Vietnam War, the Soviets celebrated the 50th anniversary of the October Revolution and their technological prowess at a special Domodedovo air show. Soviet Premier Leonid Brezhnev was on hand to greet the chief constructors of the great Soviet design bureaus. Near the end of the show, a new aircraft no one had ever seen before streaked over the runway. Knowledgeable foreign observers did a double take as the three aircraft disappeared into the clear blue sky. The announcer described them as new interceptors capable of Mach 3 flight. The design proposal dated back to 1958, when Soviet intelligence became aware of American plans to develop high-speed, high-altitude aircraft like the B-70 Valkyrie bomber. In response, Mikoyan designers developed the YE-155 prototype, which was the essence or mother of all MiG fighters that would become known to NATO as the Foxbats. The aircraft was large and powerful. It held the promise of being a true Mach 3 interceptor. The production aircraft, named the MiG-25, proved deadly in its intended role as a high-speed, high-altitude interceptor. A powerful new radar, named the Smerch, or Whirlwind, was developed for the new aircraft. It was capable of burning through any electronic jamming within 50 miles. The Foxbat was also able to carry a large new family of deadly air-to-air missiles. Photo reconnaissance was a secondary role for the MiG-25, and a series of variants were produced. The cameras fitted to the MiG-25R were capable of taking detailed pictures of the entire United Kingdom in the course of one flight. During the 1973 Middle East War, a MiG-25R was clocked over Israel at Mach 3.2. The MiG's performance caused great alarm in the West. In response, the U.S. government appropriated funds to develop the fast and powerful McDonnell Douglas F-15 fighter. While the F-15 was designed to counter the MiG-25, it was the General Dynamics F-111 swing-wing fighter bomber that left a lasting impression on the Soviets. At Sagi, researchers carefully studied models of the F-111. They developed experimental swing-wing designs in the laboratory. The first Russian variable-wing fighter to take to the skies was the Sukhoi 22I. But the first operational version would be designed by Artyom Mikoyan, a two-time hero of the Soviet Union and dean of the Russian fighter design establishment. As the world's fighter aircraft grew faster, difficulties with low-speed factors increased. Mikoyan's solution was a variable geometry wing aircraft. The new prototype fighter would become known as the MiG-23, NATO codename Flogger. Pilots could adjust the wing sweep angle to best suit operating conditions. Soviet pilots were used to the high takeoff and landing speeds of the MiG-21. The new variable geometry system of the MiG-23 offered much better handling qualities at low speeds. The new interceptor featured a powerful Lyelka engine, as well as upgraded electronics. It had to meet the demands of the Soviet Air Force, which called for beyond visual range capability. A pair of Apex air-to-air missiles were guided by a Sapphire radar system, which offered limited all-weather capability. While Western designers at the time depended heavily on radar, the Soviet Air Force believed in supplementing radar with infrared guidance systems. It was felt they stood a better chance in air combat against increasingly sophisticated electronic countermeasures. The MiG-23 could also carry 2 to 4 close-range missiles designed for dogfights. Initially, these were copies of the American Sidewinder, but later they were replaced with a Soviet design that offered better performance. A double-barreled 23mm cannon complemented the missiles. This proved to be a deadly combination in air-to-air combat. Meanwhile, the MiG-25 remained Russia's most advanced and secret fighter aircraft. It had been in service almost 4 years, but the Foxbat's capabilities were still a mystery to Western intelligence sources. On September 6, 1976, a MiG-25 took off from an airbase near Vladivostok and landed unexpectedly at a Japanese airport. Its pilot, Viktor Belenko, had defected. Western experts examined it in detail. The Foxbat's myths were now unraveled. It was much heavier and simpler than supposed. The huge Tumansky engine guzzled fuel, severely limiting the aircraft's range. It seemed more a rocket than an airplane. Clearly, the MiG-25 was no dogfighter. It was an extraordinary aircraft, but not the threat the West had imagined. But in the Soviet Union, the Foxbat continued to break records. Mikoyan chief test pilot Alexander Fedotov used the MiG-25's incredible power-to-weight ratio to climb nearly straight up. He set many records, including the absolute altitude record of 123,523 feet, which still stands. The aircraft was also fast in level flight. Svetlana Savitskaya set several closed-circuit records before she became the second female Soviet cosmonaut. The MiG-25 design team was awarded the Lenin Prize for its achievement. This honor carried great prestige. Mikoyan Design Bureau Director Rostislav Belyakov was honored along with Nikolai Matyuk, the chief designer. 4 other members of the team got their awards for the engine, radar, and control system. The MiG-25 was so successful that it provided the basis for the Mikoyan Bureau's next project, the MiG-31. From almost any angle, the new aircraft's ancestry was apparent, but its looks were deceiving. During his post-escape debriefing, Viktor Belenko claimed that a highly advanced and considerably improved MiG-25 variant was in development. Western experts learned that the project was being undertaken in response to a Soviet Air Force requirement. This called for a new low-level fighter optimized for supersonic flight at sea level. It was to be equipped with huge engines, even more powerful than the MiG-25. When the development work on the production model known as the MiG-31 finished in the early 1980s, it had matured into a new aircraft. It was structurally different and powered and armed differently than the MiG-25. Its mission had also changed. It was nearly the opposite of the one assigned to the MiG-25. The new fighter, codenamed Foxhound by NATO, featured a powerful phased array radar system, the first of its kind manufactured in the Soviet Union. Instead of using a moving dish to scan targets, it could locate them from above by the use of an electronic lens. This method can distinguish moving objects against ground clutter, hence the name look down, shoot down. The MiG-31, unlike all its predecessors, has special equipment designed to share information with other aircraft in the group. This allows the aircraft to work as an autonomous system. This represents a major shift in Soviet philosophy. It stresses the pilot's autonomy in the role of free hunter, rather than the restrictions of the ground control intercept doctrine. The Foxhound can fire from above its opponents while moving at higher speeds. The MiG's AA-9 Amos air-to-air missiles are launched from semi-recessed positions under the fuselage. They have a range approaching 80 miles. As tensions grew between East and West during the Cold War, it seemed as though things might get hot. The 1970s and 80s saw a massive buildup of U.S. and Soviet armed forces. Admiral Sergei S. Gorshkov lobbied long and hard for a Soviet blue water naval capability. The result was the Kiev, the Soviet Union's first aircraft carrier. The Kiev was not a large carrier by American standards, but it posed a problem for the West. The biggest surprise for Western observers was the appearance of a new vertical takeoff and landing aircraft they named the Forger A. The new fighter was built by Yakovlev Design Bureau and designated the Yak-38. Forger squadrons were tasked with the job of intercepting enemy patrols of reconnaissance and anti-submarine aircraft, snooping beyond the range of the Kiev's defensive missiles. The Yak-38 was impressive as the second operational VTOL fighter, but compared to the British Harrier, it was sluggish and lacked strategic capability. The aircraft was barely supersonic and needed 3 engines, each for a different purpose. Nervous pilots noted that the designers included an automatic ejection seat. The Yak-38 was of some benefit on the Kiev, but meanwhile, the Mikoyan Design Bureau planned to adapt their new MiG-29 fighter to fly from its deck. The result was the MiG-29K, or navalized version. The K model was equipped with a strengthened landing gear, folding wings, and a tailhook. The introduction of the MiG-29 startled observers at the 1988 Farnborough Air Show. It was the first Soviet high-performance fighter ever to be displayed there. The MiG-29 performed in aerial displays daily during the show. Mikoyan Design Bureau pilot Anatoly Kovacher put his aircraft through an incredible display, highlighting the fighter's ability to maneuver at high angles of attack. Codenamed Fulcrum by NATO, the new interceptor proved to be small, nimble, and agile at all speeds. One of the more stunning visual elements of the Fulcrum's routine was its amazing ability to perform tail slides at low altitude. The new aircraft possessed excellent dogfighting capability, a popular selling point that made the MiG-29 a major export item. It is in service in India and several other countries around the world. Sukhoi Design Bureau had not fared well in fighter competitions through the years, but a new generation air superiority aircraft named the Su-27 changed all that. Successful Western designs like the Grumman F-14 Tomcat and the McDonnell Douglas F-15 convinced the Soviet Air Force specialists that they needed a new fighter dedicated to a single mission. Sukhoi's unorthodox solution was a new generation heavy fighter aircraft based on unproven aerodynamic and engineering theories. It was a very risky move, but it worked. Sukhoi's Su-27 prototype beat out Mikoyan's competing design. The design principles that made the Su-27 one of the world's most capable fighters have been incorporated into a more advanced member of the new generation. The new Sukhoi Su-37 features articulated engine exhaust nozzles and canards. It's no wonder the Russians lead the world in thrust vectoring technology. The Su-37's enhanced maneuverability, together with a powerful phasotron radar and a more lethal weapon system, makes it one of the world's premier air superiority aircraft. The Sukhoi Design Bureau's fighter is true to the legacy of Russian solutions. To thine own self be true. They have reached different conclusions than the West's reliance on stealth technology. Pilots like Yevgeny Frolov know that super maneuverability and dogfighting skills will never go out of style in air combat. The Americans claim that the new F-22 will destroy enemy aircraft beyond visual range. If so, why does it have vectored thrust, supersonic cruise capability, and an automatic cannon? Russia's fighter pilots are familiar with the old maxim. There are old dogfighters, and there are bold dogfighters, but there are no old and bold dogfighters.
Coming up next, Discovery Wings Channel celebrates the golden age of flight. Look back on the spectacular successes and the devastating failures that changed flying forever. Centennial